Zo'n 10-tal jaar geleden ontmoette ik Timothy Radcliffe in Rome. Hij was toen magister-generaal van de Dominicanen en woonde tot 2001 in het Santa Sabina-klooster op de Aventijn. Sindsdien reist hij de wereld rond, schrijft boeken, geeft conferenties en vandaag ontmoet ik hem opnieuw in Brussel, waar hij lezingen geeft voor jongeren over hun pelgrimstochten. It is very good to have you, Timothy, after 10 years. I must say you haven't grown older a lot.
Oh, you're lying.
No. You see, I brought the book with the picture, so you can check for yourself. It's well, I noticed that since 2001 you're not master of the order anymore, but this hasn't changed your life a lot because you are traveling all over the continent.
I've been traveling a lot, yeah, for 20 years now.
Yeah. What do you notice? Is there something changing in the world?
Well, I think obviously when I began to travel, we were dominated by the question of the confrontation of East and West. So the big question was capitalism versus communism. And now, of course, the big question really are two. One is ecology. And we were only beginning to understand the importance of living sustainably 20 years ago. Now it is the first question about the future of the planet. And the second big question, obviously, is the relationship with Islam. For centuries, Islam was the enemy outside. And then you have a brief interruption of communism. And now we've returned what is a very old perception of Islam. The threat, often now the enemy inside. But we have to resist that. If you find a scapegoat, then you will kill innocent people. And we have to discover a secure enough identity which doesn't depend upon an enemy. At the heart of Christianity is the belief that Jesus Christ was the innocent scapegoat. Everything was loaded on him. René Girard has shown it's a universal human characteristic, temptation, to find the scapegoat and kill them. And though you're completely right, there are parts of Islam which are very anti-Western, and we must be very aware. There are parts, particularly people influenced by Wahhabi, who tend towards terrorism, but to regard that as the whole of Islam would be untrue and also disastrous.
A huge topic today in the church is the distinction between the progressives and the conservatives. Now, I know you hate being called a progressive, but aren't you? I mean, what is it that makes us have this distinction?
I think you have to make a distinction, first of all. Some people are temperamentally, psychologically more conservative and some are more progressive. Some are more fascinated by the past and some are more fascinated by the future. That's a question of psychology. And I think I'm a bit of both, in all honesty. I love tradition. I love history. I love the wealth that we receive from the past, but I also love the future. But that's just a question of temperament. Now, some people become ideologically conservative or ideologically progressive, and that's quite different. When it becomes ideological, you're saying, now I have the truth. I'm a traditionalist. It's all there in my book. Or you can have somebody who is progressive ideologically, and they say, I've got it all. I know the truth, and the past is rubbish. Now that, I think, either of those is unacceptable to Catholics, because we are necessarily traditionalist in that we receive from the past, the Gospels, the teaching of the Church, It's filled with richness. I love Augustine. I love St. Thomas Aquinas. And the most creative theologian probably ever was St. Paul. And St. Paul said, "What I received, I give to you." St. Paul was creative, but he accepted the tradition. And you could not be a Catholic without being progressive too, because you have to long for the kingdom. You have to long for justice. You have to long for the abolition of suffering. And so somebody who is ideologically traditionalist or ideologically progressive would, I think, be betraying what it means to be Catholic. But always the important question is not, is it progressive or is it conservative? The important question is it true?
How do you know?
Because you study, you think, you pray, and you talk. You study the Gospels, you study the tradition, you pray for illumination, you argue with people hoping you will learn.
But if somebody says, well, I think this is truth, and another person holds another truth, then you say only one truth can exist.
Well, what you see in the Gospels is Jesus was always, from the beginning, a man of conversation. If you take St. John's Gospel, St. John's Gospel is a sequence of conversations. From Nicodemus, the woman at the well, the blind man, with the disciples at the end, with Pontius Pilate. The whole of the Gospel, you see Jesus engaging in conversation. And that is fundamental to the mission of the church. That's fundamental to the pursuit of truth, is that we converse. Now, some people are nervous about that idea because they say, oh, if you have dialogue, it's relativistic. If it's just dialogue, where's the proclamation? Where's the conversion? But the word we have in English for a sermon is homily. And that means, literally in Greek, conversation. A homily is literally a conversation.
Doesn't look like one.
Doesn't, Lucette, always. But it has to be, it has to be part of the conversation of the whole church. And if you have a good conversation, you both change. If you have a lively conversation, both will change. I often think of my brother, Pierre Claverie. He engaged all his life in conversation with Islam. And it changed him. He became a better, deeper Christian. And it changed them. Some of them became better Muslims and some of them became Christians.
Did your image of God change in these years that you were a master of the order?
I think that one loses images of God all the time. Obviously, when you're a child, you think God has got a nice white beard and he sits on the throne. And then you lose that image. And as you get closer to God, you lose more and more images. Probably when I was a young friar, I thought God was a very powerful person. I had to lose that image. It's what we call the via negativa. And it's like if you go to kiss somebody, the closer you get, the less you see. And when you kiss them, you don't see anything at all. So I think that often the spiritual life, you let go one image after another until you see nothing.
Isn't that a kind of void then?
Can
it be depressing?
No, not at all. Quite the opposite. Because I think if all goes well, and the spiritual life is you go up and down, you know, it's not all a steady progress. But I think that what happens when you get close to God is not that you see God, but that you see everything else differently. If you get close to God, if you have friendship with God, then you see things through God's eyes. And so you see the beauty of people more. Suddenly you begin to see the world is filled with beautiful people. And you see their goodness. And you see how, I think it's not unrealistic, but Thomas Merton, after 10 years in the monastery, he went out into the street. He had to leave the monastery to get a little pamphlet printed. And he was struck by everybody. He saw that they were good. And I think that often at the beginning we're very judgmental. Particularly when people become Christians. They have a conversion experience and they are filled with a sense of their own goodness and how wicked everybody else is. But I hope that as they go closer to God, we lose that sense of judgment and we take pleasure. Because God says to every human being what he said to his son. It's wonderful that you exist. The big sins for the Middle Ages, for Dante and for Aquinas and people like that, the big sins were telling lies, falsehood, because that destroys human community. Human community is founded on the truth. So in the medieval vision, what was really fundamental was that we live together in truth. Now, also in the Middle Ages, they knew we were animals. Aquinas says we are rational animals. In the 17th century, we begin to think we're not animals, you know. Animals become other things. We are minds. And then you get a movement towards dualism, and then I think you get a lot of suspicion of sex. Of course, it's a more complex story than that.
Timothy, the book you wrote, The 7 Lost Words, is about the crosses you received. What's your favorite cross?
Well, that one there, the cross of the Rosary. There, I have it on me. And I love that one. But the one I most love is from Haiti. I have that in my room upstairs. And it shows a man on pilgrimage, you see? A Haitian peasant. And it is dark, but there is the dawn. And he's walking towards the sun. And I think that's always a cross for a pilgrim. Often you're traveling at night, you know, you're stuck in an airport, they've cancelled the plane. And you're wondering where you're going and what you're doing. But this is a good cross for travelers. It shows always the dawn comes. And there's always light in the end.